Welcome to Scott Bryson Beyond the Service. We are going to do Ben Cooper Part 2 tonight. We talked to Ben right prior to the 2024 election and wanted to kind of get a Part 2 reaction. There's just been so much going on with current events and things like that. We're just going to kind of jump into it. So Ben, welcome back to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to get in and talk about everything that's happened because there's been a lot.
Let's show the people real quickly before all three people tune out. Show them your Christmas gift your mother-in-law got you.
I don't know if I should.
No,
but my
please.
mother-in-law got me this as a joke, so it's one of these little Trump pens. So there you go.
There you go. It's not a joke.
I knew you'd ask me about that as soon as I showed you.
You shouldn't have shown me. You should not have shown me. So I think pretty much the people that are probably watching this are home teamers. If there could be a couple visitors watching tonight, but I think most of the people watching this podcast are home team people. But let's just talk real briefly, because we're going to try to keep this to about 30 minutes or so. So let's just touch real briefly on the election. I mean, when we spoke last time, I know where your heart kind of lies, but when we were talking, it seemed to me like you were kind of holding back, or maybe thought she was going to win. Do you want to expound upon like where you were mentally then, and where you think where you're at now? I don't think anything changed between the 2 years, but
no, I mean, look, I'm politically conservative. I think I really was not convinced that Trump was going to win and I was thinking early today about how to articulate this, and I think it really boiled down to, now it seems silly, right? And I certainly had friends who were like, "There's no way she's going to win," and I had friends who were like, "She's gonna win, no worries at all." My logic going into the election, with the conclusion that she was probably going to win, I think was based on three things. One, I think, was Joe Biden got more votes than Barack Obama and ran a campaign from a basement and successfully beat Trump. And I think the vitriol and the hatred for Trump from the administration and the institutions within the federal government is still, it's palpable. And so in my mind, I was like, there is no way on God's green earth that they will allow him to win. And I think in the lead up, you saw the lawfare, you saw a lot of obviously the media was on full speed, full court press. I just didn't think that they would risk a 2016 reoccurrence. Limb 2 of my thinking was the level of insanity that was allowed to happen with virtually no real consequences. And the number one thing I point to, having a lot of friends who are veterans and who served in GWAT, was the Afghanistan withdrawal. To my knowledge, the only person who's been fired is a lieutenant colonel in the Marines who called for accountability of senior leadership. And we will eventually end up back there. And, you know, the old advantage was the Western forces owned the night. They had the technology, they had night vision, they had that technological advantage. That's gone. The sheer amount of arms, technology, let alone the biometric data that was left behind, which says nothing of the American citizens and whatnot that have been left. And of course, the poor souls who volunteered to help Americans on the promise of being able to leave and come to America and live happily and safely, they were all betrayed. And there's been no real consequences for that. You got the Hunter Biden laptop and this promise that he was never going to be pardoned. You had people just pretending it never happened. You had 50 former Intel officers signing a letter saying, you know, this is all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And yet clearly it was real. And then, again, no real consequences. He promised he wouldn't pardon him, and he did. You know, I wouldn't fault a father for pardoning a son, but the extent of that pardon was such that Hunter actually had a window where he could commit a federal crime and still be covered by the pardon. That's how extensive it was. So you had the vitriol against Trump that left me thinking there's no way they're not going to leave this to chance. They're not going to do anything that would even give him a chance of winning. Then you had 4 years of tomfoolery, really, an open border, Afghanistan, fiscal policy that drove inflation through the roof with no real consequences. And then I thought the final part of it that really gave me pause and made me think that there's no way that Trump is going to win or that he would be allowed to win, is that if you were to pick a candidate where you really thought you had it in the bag and you weren't particularly concerned about the strength of the candidate, Kamala Harris is probably the person you'd run. She didn't make it through the first round of the primaries in 2015, sorry. You know, the bulk of her career has been from appointments made by Willie Brown, with whom she had a relationship. And you can pretend she wasn't the border czar, but she was. And we've had 4 years where really the only people who have benefited have been human traffickers and the drug cartels. And so I looked at that and I said, if I was going to run a candidate and I thought there was any chance they were going to lose, she's not the person I would run. And I think a little bit of that was pessimism on my part. And I think, you know, I paid a lot of attention to American elections, but I didn't grow up here. And I think maybe misunderstanding some of the interplay within the Democratic Party, because it seems to me, and I don't know, this is just conjecture, it seems to me that the first debate with Trump was a very deliberate attempt to ensure that Joe Biden would not run, because he was seemingly hanging around longer than they had hoped he would. The debate, as I understand it, happened sooner than it normally would. They wheeled him out. It was a disaster, as anyone who'd paid any attention to the state of Joe Biden's mental acuity would expect. And then I think Nancy Pelosi was the one who was pulling the strings and saying, Joe, you know, you've got to move on. What I didn't anticipate, and what I think perhaps the power brokers within the Democratic Party, again, all conjecture, didn't anticipate is that the people around Biden would immediately endorse Kamala Harris. Because I think what the Democrats anticipated was the debate, the implosion, open primary, which is why you saw Gavin Newsom having debates with Ron DeSantis and doing these tours, going on Fox and doing interviews with Sean Hannity, because I think he anticipated, he's also related to Nancy Pelosi, he anticipated that he would probably want to be one of those primary candidates in an open primary. But I suspect that the people around Biden, once they realized it was over, immediately announced that he endorsed her immediately, basically taking away the option of an open primary. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer, but I think, you know, just to summarize, I would say my thinking was the anger and hatreds toward Trump within institutions and the media was palpable. There had been a series of very, very poor policy decisions with no real consequences, no firings, no real accountability. And then if this was going to be an election where you thought there was some chance that Trump could win, given that we've been told he was Hitler, this would be the last candidate you would run when you have people like Gavin Newsom, who I am not a fan of, but you have to admit he's a phenomenal politician, which is not a compliment.
Yeah.
But he's very, very good at being a politician. And I think had he been the candidate, I still think a lot of people don't want California to be California. Sorry, America to be California. But he's very good at being a politician. Like, if you watch his interview with Hannity, he held his own. He held his own. And I think had he been a candidate, or had she selected Shapiro, instead of Waltz, maybe he could have delivered Pennsylvania and solidified that blue wall that people talk about. But, I mean, that's the other thing, is Waltz was a terrible choice. The day after or the week after, there was this collective, I felt, a collective kind of relief that the whole thing was over. And it was interesting, kind of, the wink wink, nudge nudge. People weren't necessarily saying too much, but they all seemed fairly relieved. I do think it's good that he won both the primary and the electoral college, because that takes away some of that friction that we've had in past elections, where you have one candidate winning the electoral college and the other winning the popular vote. So yeah, that's my take. I was wrong, and those were the reasons for being wrong.
Well, but you're probably glad you were wrong. So
I know my bank balance and my dollar went further, 4 years ago than it does now.
For sure. Very similar to me. I mean, what you just did was very articulate. For me, it was very simple. I thought that Trump was going to win, simply because I thought the last 4 years were so bad, just with the open border and 20 plus million people coming across the border, just influx. The prices of grocery, like people can't even afford to go to the grocery store, gas, the whole thing, the pocketbooks. I think people vote their pocketbook more than national security, whatever. And you can fuss all you want about Roe v. Wade.
It's about the economy, stupid.
Roe v. Wade, all these talking points. But at the end of the day, I think people vote their pocketbooks. And I was hoping that I was right. I thought that the only way he wouldn't win was twofold. One, God's will is God's will, right? I don't think God cares who wins Super Bowls, but I do think that he, listens to his people when we pray. And I think there were a lot of people. I was praying. I fasted, which I never fast because I like to eat, but I fasted over the election. And I think a lot of people were doing that. And I just felt like we're at a precipice, like God's either done with us and we're getting ready to implode like Rome and every other empire, or he's going to redeem us. And I feel like there's a spiritual awakening happening across our country, which is a little different topic, obviously, than politics. But not because Donald Trump's saving the world. That's not. Jesus Christ is saving us, right? But I just thought, oh my gosh, he's done with us or he's going to revive us. I'm not sure which. And then my other thought was, they're just going to cheat like they did last time. And I think I said this to you when you were on here. I can't remember, but I know I've said it multiple times. Let's pretend like Donald Trump never existed. You want me to believe that Joe Biden got more votes than Barack Obama? Come on, man. It's like they cheated like crazy. I mean, it's unbelievable. And there's a video of Biden right after the election say we put off I forget how he said it. We put off the biggest. Did you see that video?
I vaguely know the one you're talking
I'm
about,
have to
but
find it now.
I can't remember the quote.
I don't know what he called it, a fraud or whatever. I mean, it played one time. There's one clip, and I was like, he basically had a Freudian slip, and we're good.
Well, I mean, I think the other reality is the Democrats played a win.
Oh yeah.
And I think this can probably be broadly said about the left. They played a win. And they vote the party line in a way that conservatives don't. And part of that is their nature. But, the Republicans, they've certainly had a pretty strong track record of, seizing defeat from the jaws of victory and getting in their own way. And that is honestly one of the concerns I have is this new administration has a mandate. But my concern is that you have these Republican holdouts who, because they don't get exactly what they want on their particular issue, they lose sight of the big picture. I mean, politics is a game of compromise. You're not going to get everything you want every time. You've got to keep that big picture in mind. And it's going to be very interesting to see the level of control that Johnson can have on the House, because it's still going to be a pretty fine margin. And then to see if Trump he's going to make mistakes, undoubtedly. But it's going to be very interesting to see how he navigates things this time The appointment is going to be interesting, and where he cashes in his chips.
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't disagree with that. I do think that there are some lessons learned from last time. I mean, this guy was a businessman uh, trying to get into politics, which you could argue basically the CEO of the country. Oh, okay, fair enough. And I think he did a good job with the economy and that. But to your point, he didn't really realize that he had some foxes in the hen house, right? Some of the rhino, right? The rhino, like I would say there's only a handful of Republicans that I like. Most of them are rhinos. I mean, let's be honest, it's pretty much a one-party system anyway. I
Yeah,
wouldn't even.
yeah. The uniparty's a thing.
Yeah, for sure. The deep state and the uniparty, so the whole thing, party before country and person before party. I mean, how do you think these people are making 200 or 300 grand a year, but their net worth is 50 million, 100? I mean, come on, it's called
Oh yeah.
insider. They sent Martha Stewart to prison for what they do, you know. But it's like the uniparty's a real thing, but I do think there's some lessons learned there, like some sort of outside the box thinking, like with Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. I mean, that had DC spinning, like these unconventional picks,
Yeah.
So I mean, look, he's going in as a lame duck president, which I'm looking at as a glass half full thing. You know, he had to fight an uphill battle the whole time last time. We had the House and the Senate for the first 2 years of his presidency, but the rhinos were blocking him on building the wall and the whole thing. So politics is a nasty game, and you said it really well when you said that the Democrats play to win and the Republicans are. I don't know what they're doing. They're like one of these destiny football teams that lose all the time. Like there are teams like the Patriots that always find ways to win, and there's teams like whoever that find ways to lose all the time. And that's just kind of how they are.
Well, I will say, I think, and Charlie Kirk, I think in particular, and his movement did a lot in terms of the get out to vote because, we can talk about, late night plumbing disasters and power being cut out at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then all of a sudden, it comes back on at 4 o'clock, and it's like, oh, look how many votes we have. The reality is the Democrats have historically done a very good job at mobilizing and organizing, and Republicans have not. And I think this time they did a much better job. I mean, for example, when Trump said don't vote early, don't vote postal, that's the kind of stuff that Democrats don't mess around with. They do it. They get out, they vote, they organize. And I think the Republicans did a much better job than they have historically of getting people out and encouraging the vote early.
I'm a prime example of that. I've always been like, I'm going to vote on game day. Like, I think it should be. Because I think something's a certain way doesn't mean it's going to ever be that way, right? So, I'm like, it should be. You should have a voter day, and you should know the election results the next day. The only people that should get absentee ballots are the military. Blah blah blah. That's what the little soapbox I've been on. But this time, my wife and I were like, nope. We went and voted the first night. The first hour of the first night, we were standing in line. So I think it was definitely a different mindset for a lot of people this time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, for example, today, the votes were certified, and there's been a lot of talk about how this is the first time that no Democrat has challenged the results of the election where a Republican has won for quite some time. But what's interesting is there's a lot of talk about, okay, peaceful transfer of power. There was obviously a lot of humbug about, Trump was going to stay in the White House and he wouldn't leave when he lost in 2020. What is interesting, though, is that even though it's looking like it's going to be a very straightforward handover, there has been a lot that has been happening in the last few weeks that is going to make it difficult for the next administration to achieve the agenda for which it has an electoral mandate. So for example, the large-scale banning of offshore drilling that's just come down. There is going to be, for example, there are a lot of the materials for the border wall that are being sold off at rock bottom prices that the federal government is going to have to turn around and repurchase at a premium. The strategic petroleum reserves, it's no accident that just before the election gas prices come down. there's a lot of hurdles that the next admin is going to have to overcome, and it's going to have to make some really difficult and at times unpopular decisions. The reality is America's drowning in debt. You can't just keep spending money you don't have, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better in order to turn the ship around. Um, what's interesting is Canada as well. I'm pretty jazzed to see Trudeau on the way out and to see, a pretty promising relationship between America and Canada in the next few years as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. What was the impetus to that? Do you know? I mean, that just to me kind of came out of the blue. I know that Trump's been calling him the governor of Canada, but it's kind of funny. He's back, but like that to me, and maybe I just have been under a rock with all the other things I've been looking up. But like Trudeau just gone. It's weird.
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Canadian politics. For those who are interested, there's certainly a very good interview with Pierre, who's the opposition leader. I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name because I'll get it wrong, with Jordan Peterson. But it's a parliamentary system, much like the Australian and the British systems are, so it's different to where it is here, and you very often have coalition governments. And from what I understand, Trudeau's party was a more classically liberal party, but he is not a classical liberal, and a lot of those extreme left policies have been part of his 9-year reign. And as I understand it, the real tipping point for him was COVID and the trucker convoy, where the government started seizing and shutting down people's bank accounts because they were either unvaccinated or they were participating in the trucker protests. And from there, it's just kind of snowballed to the point where he's just so unbelievably unpopular with the Canadians, and their cost of living is through the roof. They've had very similar issues to what they have here, but it is a country that, much like America, is rich with natural resources. And I think they're desperate to kind of have a similar return to manufacturing domestically, prioritizing Canadians, and getting their spending under control, because much like America, they're spending more money than they're bringing in. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of consultants charging the government exorbitant fees for an agenda that's not really making life better for Canadians. And I think it'll be interesting to see him and Trump work together. And I think the tipping point was when Trudeau came down and Trump just trolled him like he does. And they don't have a great relationship from what I understand, and haven't for a long time. So I'm certainly pleased to see Trudeau go, and I'm interested to see when their next election is actually called, and to see the results of that. But I suspect it will probably be a landslide for the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Excuse me. Let's transition to some of the current events that have happened here in the first week of January. So we don't have to really get in the weeds because neither one of us are experts on human behavior or the CT world, But I think for me, it's pretty much it's not like it's rocket science. We've had an open border for 4 years. You let in 20 plus million people. You don't think you had some bad actors? Of course you did. And I think, unfortunately, the Sarah Adams lady that everybody's talking about, I've watched her on Sean Ryan every time she's been on. I'm a true believer. Like, I think she's preaching the truth. I certainly hope she's wrong, but I think she's right, and that's what's scary, right? Sometimes I'm right, and I'm wishing I was wrong. We know some things that are pretty obvious. People don't want to either accept it or talk about it. It's like putting your head in the sand doesn't make it go away or whatever. But let's just say that these troglodytes are here, which we know they are. And there are going to be unfortunately, some probably, group attacks or whatever. But I think the new way forward is this lone wolf mentality, and it's going to look like a lone wolf, but in reality, it's all coordinated. That's my take on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to remember the Biden administration was the one that freed up billions of dollars in finances to the Iranian government. You do have a lot of people that have come through that border that we have no idea who they are or where they're from. There's a video that should have got a lot more press than it did of a gentleman coming across the border, basically saying to whoever's taking the video, "You're too stupid to know who I am, but you're about to find
I
out."
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of lone wolf type stuff that goes on. I don't know what to make of Vegas. I really don't know what to make of that. I think it's too soon. On the one hand, Occam's razor is like what's the most obvious explanation, and it could be as straightforward as, here's a guy who's having a tough time mentally. But there's also some questions too, right? Like this guy's 1st Battalion, 10th Group. If he wanted to do some serious damage, he could have, certainly had the training and capacity, but he picked a cyber truck that's known for being very hard to destroy and fireworks outside of a Trump Tower. I don't know what to make of it. I think, well, I don't know. It's hard to believe what you hear in the news anymore because we've just been misled for so long. It's hard to really know what to believe.
Well, I feel the same way, Ben. I feel so wishy-washy on it. One minute I think, like, I have yet to come on here on any of my platforms and say, this is what happened, because I don't know. I don't know what happened. But I have opinions, and I think it's okay to ask questions and to be confused and just seek out the truth. The problem is we've been lied to so much by the mainstream media and just, people in general lie, right? But I think that the people out there, the truth seekers, like I'd like to consider myself a truth seeker. I really want to know the truth. I wanted the truth about COVID. I wanted the truth about the vaccines. I want the truth about, War X or, the economy. Just give me the truth, or just report the facts and then let me kind of determine what I want to believe from that. But don't put a spin or a twist on it, which, let's be honest, all news media pretty much does. And both parties definitely do. But then you've got people like Sean Ryan out there who I believe is trying his best to speak truth to power and really reveal, the truth and unveil the truth. And now people are hating on him and the guy he had on his show the other night, Sam. I can't remember Sam's last name, but Sam.
Shoesmith, I think his name.
Shoemate, maybe, or something. But
something like that.
Yeah, but he's kind of changed his story, and I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, did they get to you? It's like, and I'll be honest with you, me having this podcast, which is in its infancy, and then doing some social media stuff that I do the shorts on like Instagram and TikTok. I don't really feel comfortable doing that. I feel very vulnerable. I mean, I really do. I'm putting my name and my face out there. And I'm sure some people are like, man, you're an idiot. Probably some people that I used to work with are like, what an idiot. And that's fine. You can think what you want. I know what's in my heart. I know what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to lead people to Christ, which may sound a little weird, but especially in this platform, since I'm not a preacher or whatever. But I don't put my faith or my hope in any one man. And I'm a big Trump supporter. But Donald Trump, I don't put my faith or hope in Donald Trump or my wife or anybody. I put it in Jesus, right? And so I'm trying to bring people to the Lord, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job or not. And I think, but you can't just talk about that all the time because I'm not a preacher and I'm not a theologian. And let's be honest, how many people are going to sit around and watch that? So I try to keep things relevant and then weave in my faith, And I think Sean's been doing a really good job of that. And I know Bongino's a professed Christian. I want to use whatever platform the Lord's given me to speak truth to power. But I'll be honest with you, Ben, the last week has been a little unnerving for me. And I have a very small footprint, but it's a little nerve-wracking.
Oh, it is because, and I find even just talking on a forum like this about my own personal political viewpoints tough as well. Because, I spent my prior career in law, and law firms have become, very political. But then I spent almost a decade in higher education, where, you know, you really have a very limited scope of things you can say and think, and fall within the orthodoxy of academia. So the idea of actually coming out and saying what you think is kind of a intimidating concept in a lot of ways, especially when we've all become conditioned to the idea of the fact that you can be cancelled. Joe Rogan can't be cancelled, right? He has so much, he's got that kind of FU money where it's like you could cancel him tomorrow and it's not going to hurt him. He's going off and live his life. But for the average Joe, you know, that's a real threat. I think what's interesting about this election and Trump's campaign spent, and I really hope there are some investigations into where all of this campaign financing money went, but he did not spend anything like what was spent by the Democrats. And he focused his campaign on speaking to people on podcasts. And I have a hard time believing that MSNBC, CNN, and to be honest with you, Fox, are going to exist in the same way that they do now in 10 to 15 years. Because I think that the average person is very distrusting of media. People who watch MSNBC don't trust Fox. People who watch Fox don't trust MSNBC and CNN. But people are able to access a variety of different opinions now in the form of podcasts. And this long form, nuanced conversation where you can sit down with somebody for 3 hours and go through and have this broad ranging conversation, I think is actually a really good thing, because in a lot of these formats you have people who don't agree. It allows people who don't agree to sit down and have a conversation, for people to see that conversation. I think that's healthy. I think that's a good thing, because journalism as a profession, I think at one point was a very noble one. You needed people who were willing to do the hard work, do real investigative journalism. But the minute news became 24 hours, it became entertainment and not news. And it was more important, like you and I were talking off camera, it's more important to be first than to be right. And I think what's great about this medium is that there are people out there doing real journalism and bringing news to people, and it's allowing people to make a more informed choice about how they live their lives.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about Tucker Carlson and James O'Keefe. Of course, he kind of does a lot of the undercover stuff.
Yeah. He's done
and I have no
of that.
desire to be a journalist or whatever. I have no desire to go into that world, I don't think. But I do have a little knowledge, okay, based on the 25 years I spent with the service. And for me, I started doing this podcast more as a cathartic thing, because I had so much pent up thing. Like for 25 years, I couldn't speak really freely about politics because of the Hatch Act, and I just couldn't talk.
Yeah.
And I still have to be careful because I'm still a public servant. I'm still working in law enforcement, but I try to be careful with what I say. And I've gotten permission from my employer to do this, and they just said please don't say where you work, and that's fine. I don't. But I joked with some of my supervisors about this, where I currently work, and I've joked about it a million times with my wife. I feel like I have battered spouse syndrome because the service beat me down so bad I couldn't talk about anything. It's like we're not a military organization, but it's sort of a paramilitary deal, and it's like you're going to be you're going to volunteer, you're going to be voluntold, and by God, you're going to like it, and so it's like, it just feels a little different. I'm getting older. I care less and less what people think about me, which is, I guess, a good thing. I'm just trying to find my way in it, but it feels weird and it feels sort of unnatural at times. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to find my niche. I want to help people. The bottom line is I want to help people. I truly want to help people. I want to share whatever little bit of wisdom and knowledge that I have, that I might could pay that forward to the next generation. Or the guys coming up in their 30s and 40s that are they're in law enforcement, and because it's hard, marriage is hard, and life is hard, and law enforcement is hard, and like, how can I help somebody with their marriage or with their faith journey or whatever? But I do want to uncover the truth. Whatever the truth is, the truth, right? And I just
Yeah.
right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you're left, right, green, or purple, I don't care. Just tell me the truth, and that's what I'm trying to do. So,
Yeah, and I think too, the older you get, the more that you realize they're a lot more grey than they are black and
yeah,
white.
for sure.
Like there's a lot of grey in the world.
Yeah, I live in.
And the more you learn about history, you realize, oh, some of these characters that you put up on a pedestal, they weren't all bad, but they weren't all good either.
Well,
And
yeah, and to your point,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but you made me think.
no,
I was saying this to. I think I was saying this to Carl the other night. It's like I love my country, man. I'm a patriot. I didn't serve in the military, but I've been a public servant for almost 30 years, and I love my country. I really do. And nothing moves me like seeing the flag flying and hearing the national anthem. I love that. I'm a very patriotic guy, but I'm like, oh my gosh, have we? I'm not going to say we're the bad guys. I don't think we're the bad guys, but I mean, I don't think we're always the good guys. That's when I say we, I mean the upper echelons of government, the military-industrial complex, the politicians. I love the military. I love my coworkers. I don't think the boots on the ground have ever been the problem, but the hierarchy, President X or President Y, and this party and that party, and the politicians, I'm like, holy crap. I think we might have been duped.
it's a really interesting. I've wrestled with that. The more I learn and the more I read, and the more you realize that there are there is a need in the world for good people to do bad things. There is that need because here's the thing: power abhors a vacuum, and if America is not out there keeping the peace and managing things, then it's not like no one's going to fill that void. And China and Iran and Russia are going to be the ones who do it. And so you need folks to do bad things in order to keep that peace. But it does make the world a lot more grey. Like, for example, if you start reading into the history of certain agencies that start with C, you begin to see that while it was, necessary to combat, for example, the Soviets and the KGB and whatnot, there was some pretty shady things done. And this is not crazy stuff. You can go and look at really reputable stuff like Annie Jacobsen, who's written extensively on some of those projects and the moral ambiguity of those activities. But in a lot of ways, those things that we would look at through rose-colored glasses as being morally ambiguous were done in the interests of the United States, which is honestly what every country should do. They should act in their own best interests. But it does force you to see the world through this lens of grey rather than just black and white.
Yeah. No, I think that's I think that's really well said. I live in the gray. I've stayed in the gray for a long time. Law enforcement,
Yeah.
a lot of time, law enforcement is pretty black and white. My analogy I use is like there's the spirit of the law and there's the letter of the law for like your daily, cop out there on the street doing his thing, pulling cars over or whatever. But, as a Secret Service agent, especially when I was in like our surveillance unit, like it's super gray. Things aren't always black and white. It's really, really gray. And you have to have you got a lot of autonomy when you're out there doing some stuff, but you better be right.
Yeah.
And the bad guys only have to get it right once. You got to get it right all the time. And then I try not to read some of the. We're going to wrap it up here in a second because I know we're a little over, but I can keep talking. I love talking to you, Ben. But
Likewise.
But I really try not to read the comments that much anymore because I've been getting so many, which is a good problem to have. But sometimes, one will pop up and I'll take a quick look at it. And somebody said today,
I'm too scared to read the comments.
I know, don't do it. Don't go there. This one person said, well, define who the good people are, or define the good guys or something. And I'm like, well, to me, the good guys are the innocents, right? Mostly children. Like children are the good guys. So, evil, evil's evil and good is good. I mean, I don't know. That could be a whole. We could do a whole session on that.
Oh yeah, I mean that is an interesting one. I mean, I do think too there are some good people who take on the burden of having to do necessary but unpleasant things. Like if someone has to do them because we live in a broken, fallen world where bad things happen, and I think we're naive if we think that in order to preserve some sense of good, we're not going to be able to have to do some things that are unpleasant but necessary. And I guess that's the burden of leadership, isn't it?
Yep. Well, we talk about this all the time at my house. There's a huge difference between leadership and management.
Yeah.
I want to lead people. You should manage your finances, right? Like the Secret Service, and I'm not going to get off on a Secret Service tangent, but like I would say 2/3 of management is just that management. They're managers.
Yeah.
I worked for some good leaders. I did, and when I was in supervisor, I tried to be a leader. Uh, I I don't know if I did a good job or not, but huge difference between management and leadership, right? Um, so
Oh, sure. And you see these you see it in companies all the time where they have someone, let's like, who's a really good engineer, and instead of keeping that person on an engineering track where they're a really good engineer, you stick them in management. And just because they're a really great engineer doesn't mean they're going to be a good manager or a good leader. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in a lot of roles where they have leadership and management responsibilities where they're not particularly great at those things.
well, listen, Ben, we're a little over. I love having you on. We spoke earlier today, completely offline, and it was great too. So
Well, it's
you're
mutual.
you're welcome.
Mutual.
You're welcome on here anytime. I think people probably love hearing the way you talk, and they like where did this hillbilly and this Australian dude find each other?
It's fun to chat with you, Scott, and I know we're running long, but always enjoy the conversation. I appreciate the chance to come on and shoot the breeze.
Yeah, man. Well, listen, give my love to the wife, and we'll see you soon, buddy.
We will. We will.
Okay.
Thanks again, Scott.